Cade felt the morning mist creep through him, a hollow that casts a soft white veil over the town, and calming the rough slopes underneath. Its coolness and the aroma of damp leaves. And there was an underlying worry that persisted, like the wet five, into the bones of the town. Wild and unclaimed German shepherds had made Cade Hollow's edges there, domain what started off as infrequent occurrences. The tree's brief shadows had, becoming more difficult to ignore. Coop doors ripped open, revealing circling tracks. Cattle pens owned by the Jeffersons. Animals discovered in a goat corral that was broken into, shuddering in a corner. But unharmed rumors grew more quickly than facts. People even referred to them as feral rabies. Someone claimed to have seen one with blood on it, its jaw, even though there were no wounds. Sheriff Boone Carter reportedly posted cautions along the feed store's path and be on the lookout for any unfamiliar dogs. Animal control arrived after the activity was over. The dogs were clever yet evasive. They moved like smoke with teeth, with remarkable coordination. Homes are never too far away or too close. Nobody could say for sure about each other. Some believed that the place where they rested was abandoned. Others murmured about old, abandoned military training camps, projects, or worse. But what? The town wasn't much frightened by what the dogs had done, that because it was what they could do. Afterwards, in the quiet before sunrise, when the world was still and the fog was at its worst, held its breath while multiple lights were on, glowed in Cade Hollow's former. Because farmhouses are located right beyond, there are 5 shadows on the fence lines. Pine was where Evelyn Cade had resided. Hollow rescue for almost 2 decades. Sufficient to understand that quiet could carry weight. She had previously worked as a hospital nurse. Soft shoes, long shifts, and the low hum of machines that sustain human life. But following her daughter's mishap, the only noise she could tolerate was the rustle of breeze among pine needles and the stable. Now retired and breathing in time with her own, Evelyn is grayer than she would ever acknowledge. She checked the paddocks in the mornings, and drinking 2 cups of hot coffee from a bar, crunching mud boots over frostbitten grass. She stopped talking a lot there, had little to say about her granddaughter. 14 months prior, Nora had arrived clutching a plush fox and donning identical all of the pajamas from the night. Since then, the house has expanded, even more subdued. Nora hadn't said not even to Evelyn, not a single word. No sobs, no cries, not even from a weak, halting child's voice as they learn to talk. She sketched pages and pages instead of saying goodbye. It started out with shapes, circles, and lines, formless shadows. However, with time, the sharpened drawings acquired edges and eyeballs. One evening, Evelyn noticed fur teeth. While folding clothes by the fireplace, on the couch, the sketchbook was open. 5 dogs gazed out of the page each time, stroked carefully, making each stance unique. The biggest head, Onyx, is low and wary, tensed and ready to attack mist, rust. Behind the others, half hidden, and 2 additional, unknown, smaller, but vigilant Echo and Vale. She gazed anxiously at the page. Nora had not, at least not that much, seen those dogs. The following morning, Evelyn was aware of, inquired softly, "Where did you see the sweet pea?" Nora didn't check her pencil for them, continued to move, obscuring a tail's curvature. Evelyn simply stood there without pressing, in the quiet of a home where sorrow had reduced even footsteps to murmurs. However, when she checked on Nora that evening, she discovered the girl dozing off with the 5 dogs carved in a notebook on her chest, as if they were waiting across the pages. That morning, there was a lot of mist. Evelyn had risen when the sound was swallowed. Early disturbed by a dream she was unable to remember, but which made her back tense, and she passed through with a faint breath. Her daily schedule with a hint of urgent coffee that was left on the porch, railing while she looked around the field for motion. The fog held tight, pressing against the fence's wooden slats, like a living creature, and then she noticed it, little form that is merely a shadow, crossing the frost slick silently. She referred to the grass as Nora, which means sharp. There was no response. Nora was, "Evelyn, you're already halfway to the fence." Fled the porch with her knees bulging, protesting. "What a sweet pea," she yelled. "Cease." However, the girl did not stop her. Walked as if someone had been called by. Something that only she could hear when Evelyn arrived at the field's edge. Breathless panic swept through Evelyn's chest. All of her instincts told her to sprint to seize Nora and drag her away. Were wild and not pets. Unpredictable and hazardous, the stories had created monsters from those ripped dogs. Fences ripped to pieces, Ku's eyes glowed in the shadows, and now her grandchild. Fragile and motionless, Nora stood inside. Within their grasp, Evelyn's breath caught. The picture of jaws clenching around a. Lightning flashed on the child's arm. She wanted to shout her head once again, but her voice did not work. There are 5 German shepherds. Just past the fence, stood in a line. Onyx, partially obscured by cloud, stood at. Her dark cloak was immobile in the center. Whirling in the chilly air, the mist lingered at. Rust Echo was just visible on her flank, and the other people's muscles were taut, and the veil. Nora didn't hesitate, her ears high, halted a short distance from the fence, and knelt with her little hands out wide. The wind moved the dogs, who were facing up. Neither she nor he moved. It was Evelyn who stopped. Time dragged, panting uncontrollably, then mistook just one head, one stride ahead. The air held its breath, and the low body tense. Evelyn hadn't noticed the smile on Nora's face. After more than a year, she grabbed the radio. Sheriff Carter. This was clipped to her belt. Get out here, Evelyn. They're at the fence, and by that time, Nora is with them. When the sheriff showed up, it had passed. The 5 had grown thicker once more, covering the meadow with a shroud. The dogs were absent, but the security camera, placed on the roof of the barn, had caught it. 5 wild and all of Nora, kneeling peacefully. Shepherds in formation, such as soldiers in front of a calm, kind leader. Evelyn watched the video that evening. Repeatedly, the pictures didn't. They scared her and perplexed her. A girl who had been kneeling and silent for more than a year, serenely in front of 5 untamed dogs, and the dogs that hadn't lunged or snarled, had stood waiting and listening. Something twisted in Evelyn's chest, but a thirst for knowledge. She had to understand what it meant and how it was feasible, and above all, the reason why Evelyn, the wind had shifted that afternoon, observed it as the horses were being fed. A stiff breeze descended from the ridge and swiftly carries the smallest hint of. She stopped smoking, her nostrils flaring, looking through the tree outside of sanctuary. Sirens blasted a few minutes later. The fire originated in an ancient house in the east. Maintenance shed close to the holloway. Trail a group of children tampering with fireworks. Later on, someone remarked, the wind turned the ignite a wall of fire inside, rushing through arid underbrush for minutes. Harper Linden's 3-year-old daughter had strayed from her backyard while the confusion when her mother discovered that the fire had already reached the. What transpired next to the tree's edge wasn't anticipated to be feasible. It started. She lifted her head to listen to Onyx, muscles tightening and twitching when the smell. Her eyes narrowed as the smoke rode the breeze. Then Rust's deep growl could be heard. Like a warning alarm, hackles rise. They transferred 5 bodies silently, slicing through the foliage as if present, quick, accurate, and intentional. Wasn't arbitrary. Rather, it was instinctive. In the smoke-filled clearing, something older. In the midst of burnt pine, Harper cried. Needles. Anyone previously stood guard, protecting her from the intruding. Rust defended the flank with snarling flames. Low Mist gave Harper a gentle prod to stand. Echo gave a piercing bark, and, urgent as Veil, pinned her ears in a circle, examining each twig's crack like a soldier and a companion watch for an ambush. They did not drag the youngster when they moved them, aching but directing each movement. Every step is put with care and protection. Instead of fleeing the flames, they fled. A local hiker had noticed it heading toward her. Unfold remotely, he had been on the ridge, seeing the smoke via binoculars. As he noticed motion through the haze, 5 rapidly moving shapes. Intentional. The dogs, he got it all on his phone and subsequently carried out a. By the time the firefighter's helmet cam. When Harper's mom arrived to the clearing, the dogs had returned to the trees. Soot. However, her daughter stood unscathed. safe but smeared, still holding on a little. One small fistful of Echo's fur, spread too quickly to manage all at once. Fear shattered the town, and people didn't. I'm not sure how to describe instinct training. Miraculous, but it was evident that the canines had prevented them from pursuing that child. They were keeping Evelyn safe. Viewed the video later that night. Her eyes were hurting and her chest was tense. Understood that the town wasn't merely seeing the dogs in a different way, they were beginning to view Nora and the town hall in a different way. Has never been so busy during the week. Folding chairs scuffed over the evening. Dust was trampled into the floor by the boots, corners, and there was a bustle of something somewhere between interest and discomfort. Sheriff Boone Carter was in the front, with his arms folded and his face unreadable. A projection screen blinked to the right. Live video stopped on a still image of Harper's small hand clutching Echo's fur. The room was filled with murmurs. Dr. Marion Wells remained close to the rear until Sheriff Carter gave her a tall nod. Wearing a field jacket, windburned, and hiking boots, she appeared to be more of a wildlife monitor than a scientist. But her unwaveringly focused eyes said, "I've examined the video." She started her strong but low voice, everything from even the helmet cam's ridge. Cams in sanctuaries, what we're witnessing is not arbitrary actions. To click on the slide 5 shows 5 stills, one for each dog. These creatures aren't wild. This is pack behavior, which is bonded structured. Not hostility, but defense. They're defending one another's land. And now, that tiny girl's laughter, evidently, broke off one corner. What are they now? Rescue dogs. Dr. Wells remained unflinching. I don't work in idealized fantasies and patterns. And these patterns point to previous trauma, maybe severe training and desertion. What they are currently demonstrating to us is careful coordination and reaction to. She turned because she thought there was a threat, not violence. To turn back to the television, what transpired? The fire was purposeful, not panic that is instinctive rather than chaotic. Based on decision, Dr. Ease is not a monster. Wells's voice remained solid, but measured. They are creatures that have survived, molded by adversity rather than malice. We often fear the things we don't know, and these dogs have only been viewed suspiciously. However, their actions don't align with the story we've created about them. She pointed to the still paused video. On the screen, they didn't assault at all. Unprovoked, they didn't even try to. Without explanation for each movement we've observed. Points from the fire to the standoff. Restraint with the intention of protecting. Instead of hurting him, she left the words hanging. If we consider everything wild as a danger we don't tolerate, redemption that these creatures have demonstrated to us, who they are, the decision now rests with us. Evelyn, if we're open to seeing it. Seen from her rear heart seat, Nora was sitting next to her sketchbook, banging open, graphite-smudged fingers, and the girl, someone inquired, and Dr. Wells glanced. Returned to the audience after moving toward Nora. She's become part of the pack, she said. Merely stated, they react to her differently, and we must comprehend why. Because we might not be able to save. She hesitated. We might figure out how to listen differently. One must see differently. And perhaps to. Then the town's viewpoint started to. Whispers became softer when Nora, replaced by inquisitive looks. Fear remained, but now curiosity shared its. Evelyn, in her space at Pine Hollow Rescue. Dr. Wells started the gradual procedure of organized observation. They identified regions where the worn-out canines had seemed to be placed. Clothing and fragrance indicators along the sets up motion signatures and trails. Cameras to gather information, but Nora was at the heart of everything. Every morning, she made a brief solo climb up the ridge trail. Warm milk thermos in one hand, a bag in the other, of bread crusts and jerky in the other. Her sketchbook was usually under her arm, is already partially occupied with sketches of the 5 dogs in various positions, various moods, but she never called on them. She just sat with her legs crossed and never pursued, waiting beneath a stunted pine, and when they finally arrived, Mist was first. Always in the mist, he came at a diagonal. Low, slow, but purposeful tail steps. He would only watch on certain days. He would lie down with his eyes fixed on the ground. With each woodland, Nora's ears flicker. Sound echo occasionally join next, sweeping around and occasionally settling somewhat nearer than the day before rust. Followed echo without stopping. He was restless like a windstorm and dry. Veil leaves emerge around nightfall, casting greater shadow than the material that is only apparent in Onyx. Onyx never showed up in the camera footage. Too near, yet she constantly observed Dr. Wells meticulously documented every change in posture and distance behavior. She whispered, "They're testing proximity." Evelyn binoculars were squeezed once too. Her expression, "This is not a negotiation." Retreat. However, Nora was in possession of the key. Changed as well, straightening her shoulders. With greater assurance, she started to brush Max, the elderly cattle dog at the sanctuary without. When questioned, she began to walk away. At night, the bedroom door opens once Evelyn discovered her humming softly without music, but these weren't statements that they were signs, and in the silence, 5 shadows between stones and trees turned gently in the direction of a young girl and started to listen as the storm quickly moved in. There are no thunderheads approaching. A moment of caution in the air was quiet, hot in the middle of July, and the wind then came roaring down. Evelyn, the ridge resembles a freight train, was struggling in the barn when it happened. Stall door latching against the rising. Thunder whipped sideways by gusts of rain. Somewhere in the area, it cracked like rifle fire. A tree split from a distance with a noise similar to. As her bones snapped, she remembered Nora. She hurried to the home, immediately, wet. By the time she arrived at the screen door was hanging open on the porch. Kitchen table quickly taped to There was a letter in Nora's glass. Uneven print, "They will be afraid that I must." Evelyn was devastated, but she didn't. She wore boots instead of coat, lunging up the mud while slipping. Ridge trail with a howling wind. Branches flew by through the trees. The creek was rapidly rising and swirling. She arrived at the clearing, brown and furious, close to the observation blind as, over the tops of the trees, lightning split. Nora stood amid sheets of rain, soaked to the hair that was affixed to her bone cheeks, but calmly standing motionless in front of her. Miss pressed near to her with 5 dogs. Rust and Leg, Echo circled close to Vale, stood low and exhausted behind her, and Onyx. Between them and the storm, Onyx stood. Her eyes were riveted and her body taut ears forward. On a deeper level than whether Evelyn didn't dare Nora to call her out. Held up one hand, not to give an order, not to wave, but just to be visible. Her palm was open. She remained motionless, and the dogs came one by one. They followed her as they went down the ridge across water and wind beyond the thunder and splintered trees coming through the gate. In her panic, Evelyn had left unlatched. Dr. Wells, into the sanctuary meadow, would subsequently refer to it as a breakthrough of trust at the species level, but Evelyn is observing. Her granddaughter vanishes into the 5 shadows following her like a mist. Nora, breath could only think of one thing, was no longer alone. It occurred twice. There was a sound in the evenings following the storm, a shriek that was followed by a harsh metallic. Evelyn froze. Rust mid-step, they discovered him caught in outdated barbed wire close to the rear pasture. It was time to replace the fencing. However, the ground had moved due to the rain, exposing a long span that no one had ever seen. Rust's leg was caught twisted for years, at a strange position, blood seeping into. He didn't growl at the ground under him, didn't break, but instead observed them with wide. Terrified, Nora's eyes moved first, and she knelt next to. Without hesitation, her hands. She shuddered, but her voice was quiet. Held in her hand, she extended her hand into her coat and took her sketchbook out. The 5 dogs curled as they turned to a new page. She held her while she slept beneath the stars. It's up to Onyx the Alpha, not Rust. Stood close by, her gaze taut and immovable. Glanced to Nora, then to the page. Returned to Rust, after which she took a step back. Evelyn knelt next to her, holding a sign. Granddaughter, they worked together. Rust cleansing the wound using a snipping wire. One whimper, but never. Shifted, and the final piece of metal dropped. Rust turned slowly and didn't run away. and put his head against the open mouth of Nora. Home they laid him on that evening. Nora sat on blankets in the barn, next to him, cross-legged, stroking her. No words, just gentle fingertips running over his fur. Simply the sound of trust and a gentle breath. Being born after the others arrived. First Echo, then Shroud, then Onyx Mist, showed up in the doorway, and she made a, circling Nora slowly, then without. She bowed her head and made a sound. The last. The trial's 2 days went by more quickly then. Sheriff Carter showed up, as planned just after midday, accompanied by local residents, council members, nearby ranchers, and even some. Video doesn't convince skeptics yet. Alone, they congregated beside the fence. Eyes narrowed, line wrapped in coats. Nora, against the dazzling fall sun, stood by himself in the pasture, unfazed. There were merely open cages and no leashes. After a moment of stillness, she knelt down. Head sank yet still. Mist appeared first. As usual, he moved slowly and touched his nose to her hand and cuddled himself against her. Echo trailed behind, wagging his tail. Russ limped forward, body tight, quietly, but stable, resting next to her. Vale's head brushed her knee as she came out of the brush and took a seat a few feet from it, cautious but composed. And then, Onyx the shepherd in black crossed the field with deliberate movements she didn't. Rush's eyes did not look at the crowd. When she got to Nora, they were on the girl. She hesitated, then dropped her head and softly placed it against the girl's shoulder. The crowd gasped. No applause, just a tight breath of amazement. Evelyn moved forward and spoke in a obvious, and I believe that speaks louder than any. Sheriff Carter was able to look at the nobody opposed it in the council. The sun slowed down that night, revealing golden light throughout the grassland where 5 shepherds were sleeping under cottonwood. Nora sat on the edge of her perch in the tree, notebook with pencil and hand balanced on. She didn't sketch fur or positions with her knees. This time, she sketched shadows, herself surrounded by the 5 knot, leading rather than merely following where they are. As nightfall approached, Evelyn joined her complete, brought 2 mugs of warm cider, deepened. She didn't say anything at first. She just saw Nora shading the final touches. I put down the pencil and grinned without. You okay? At the paper, but at the world. Lovely P. Evelyn inquired, and Nora nodded. Then, for the first time in over 15 months, she mentioned, they even wear dangerous, she claimed, but Evelyn was just afraid. Blinked vigorously to control her breathing. Nora said gently, I was afraid too. The field mist once gave a piercing, happy bark. Onyx raised her head, and Echo yawned, turned to face the porch. The young woman in the pack, the hurt, the storm, and the silence, and the recovery to which they all now belong. Additionally, Kate Hollow used to be a whisper town, and anxiety started to write new narrative.